guys! Today I want to talk with you about The Tower of Dawn, a fantasy adventure novel by Sarah J. Maas. Tower of Dawn was published in 2017 and it is the sixth and penultimate book in the Throne of Glass series. As well as this is the book which, instead of continuing the story told in the Empire of Storms, takes us back to the beginning of the Empire of Storms and tells us the story of Kael and Nesryn at the southern continent, parallel to the events happening in Erilea. So as per usual, we will start this review with a short synopsis, then proceed into the non-spoiler review and wrap this video with the spoilers. If you want to catch up on the previous installments of the series, make sure to check out my previous videos for the Throne of Glass. And if you haven't read this book yet, then do not worry. I will make sure to let you know when the spoilers begin. However, I do need you to keep in mind that this whole video will include spoilers from the Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, Heir of Fire, Queen of Shadows, and Empire of Storms. You have been warned. To be honest with you, the further down the road we go with these books, the more difficult it becomes to actually summarize and introduce to you the synopsis of them. And that's simply because the books rarely introduce something completely new, and instead just continue to tell us the story we are already familiar with. However, I was surprised to say the least when I realized that Tower of Dawn decided to break this pattern. So, Tower of Dawn, as quickly mentioned in the introduction of this video, concentrates mostly on Kael and Nesryn. During the last chapters of Queen of Shadows, Kael is gravely injured and therefore he's being sent together with Nesryn to the southern continent where most powerful healers reside. With the upcoming war, Kael hopes to get the motion of his legs back in order to feel useful, as well as he needs to do anything in his power to convince the foreign forces to join their battle. And while the tasks which are set upon him are already complicated enough, Kael and Nesryn quickly learns that there's a storm brewing in the southern continent too. The youngest princess has recently committed suicide, leaving the royal family in a deep grief and feeling numb to the threat of the war brewing in Erilea. However, not everyone believes that the death of the princess was actually self-inflicted. And while the possibility of Volg attacking the royal family could be useful in order to force the Kahan to join their course, it also means that Kael and Nesryn are in much more danger than originally anticipated. As soon as I realized that this book is only going to be about Kael, I have to admit that I instantly became worried. Partly because during Queen of Shadows, Kael has been demoted to my least favorite character, and so consequently, I didn't particularly like the idea of spending over 600 pages in his head, partly because Kael and Nesryn never appealed to me as a couple, and partly because almost all of the previous books in the series, with the exception of Throne of Glass, included a multitude of characters as well as their POVs, and I was just afraid that without this variety of storylines, the book will just be plain boring. Though at the same time, I have to admit that it was pretty ballsy move for Sarah J. Maas to not only leave us on such a massive cliffhanger at the end of Empire of Storms, but also to so completely ruin Kael's character in Queen of Shadows and then dedicate the whole book to just him. So I sat down to read the book, thinking that I'll just need to push myself through it, as once I'm done with Kael's story, I will finally get to move and read Kingdom of Ash and get the conclusion I so desperately needed. And not even 50 pages into the Tower of Dawn, the strangest thing happened. I realized that I'm actually enjoying this. And while I was still completely devastated about the ending of the previous book, I was glad that I was given this opportunity to break away for a moment from the inevitable war and experience the southern continent. Now, the main reason why this book was success in my eyes is undoubtedly the introduction of Yrene. This woman just won me over almost as soon as she appeared in the story. I could handle Kael's chapters because most of them included Yrene, or because I knew that after I finished reading about his self-pity party, I will get to read about Yrene being a badass. Yrene is such a different character in my eyes than the rest of the female characters in this series. And while I adore all of the ladies introduced to us by Sarah J. Maas, Yrene was the first female character who managed to do what Aya Lin has done before. She stole the show. While Manon, Lysandra, or Nesrin are complex women who are also caring and vulnerable at points, their primary strength is actually physical strength. Elite is much more similar to Irene because neither of them are physically as strong as the other characters, and their strength is primarily emotional, traditionally more feminine. Years of abuse, though, pushed Elite to be more cautious, and while we saw her being able to stand her ground very well in The Empire of Storms, her lengthy imprisonment caused her at times to feel very young and unsure of herself. Now Irene is a grown, confident woman. A woman who worked incredibly hard for everything she has. In my eyes, Aylin and Irene are like two sides of the same coin. They both lost their families in a gruesome manner at a very young age. They both built these lives for themselves with very little outside help. They both are very confident in their capabilities, and they are very honest about what they want. The difference between them being that Aylin was built for killing, while Irene was built for healing. There is so much light in Irene's character. The way she cares for others, the way she nurtures them back to health. I found immense pleasure in getting to know her, and she made this book worth reading for me. Now, on the more negative side, I have to point out that at least to me, at points the book felt unnecessarily long, as in characters kept on doing the same things, having similar conversations to the ones they have already had, or going to adventures or locations that don't have any real impact on the story. It felt that if some of these scenes from the book would have been cut out in order to make it, let's say, 100 pages shorter, nothing necessary or important would have been lost. After reading this book, I looked around through other people's impressions and noticed that there is a number of people who see Tower of Dawn as a book which is somewhat of a filler, something that they would skip during the reread of Throne of Glass series. Yet I can't say that I feel the same way. Even if by the end of the book Kael is not anywhere near among my top 5 favorite characters of the series, I do have to admit that this book was needed plot-wise and character development-wise. Overall, I found the plot of the book as well as the addition of this new continent and these new characters thoroughly enjoyable. And on this note, let's move to the spoiler review so we could go a little bit deeper into the plot of this novel. If you haven't read Tower of Dawn yet, now it's the perfect time for you to click off this video. One of the best things that this book did, in my eyes, was allowing Kael and Nesrin to go on their separate adventures. Despite the two storylines being heavily intertwined, they still allowed us to see them both as individuals. I'm completely sure that if Nesrin would have stayed at the palace and hung around while Kael is getting treatment, she would have just fallen into his shadow and be forgotten. If anything, I would argue that this book needed to give us more of Nesrin. I loved her storyline so much. This was the first time when we really got to see her not just as a good fighter, but as an individual, as a human who is lonely and scared and homesick. In addition to that, I adored her and Sartak's story. They both are just such cutie pies. And is it just me, or Sartak and his newfound family outside of his real family gives me very similar vibes to one High Lord from the Court of Thorns and Roses series? No? Just me? Okay then. Now, if you have seen my previous videos on the Throne of Glass series, you know that I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Kael. Back in Throne of Glass, I did honestly believe that he would be a great match to Celaena, as both of them seem to understand each other on a much deeper level, and they both seem to have come from similar paths of life. They're both soldiers of sorts that are forced into living the lives they don't particularly enjoy. When I started reading Crown of Midnight, Kael took this role of the main love interest, and he did a really good job in my eyes. He might have not been the best boyfriend, but for most of the book I could honestly believe that he is crazy about Celaena, and I could understand his personal anxiety which arises from choosing between love and duty. And then, with Heir of Fire, everything concerning Kael started to go slowly to shit. The more the story progressed in the Heir of Fire, the less Plus, I could understand this weird, exaggerated sense of duty Kyle felt, and with Queen of Shadows, I just started hating him for being so judgmental and hypocritical. Honestly, once I realized that Kyle will not take any part in Empire of Storms, I felt more than okay with it. I needed a break from his self-righteous attitude anyways. And while I definitely agree that Kyle's character improved immensely during Tower of Dawn, I still can't say that I actually like him as a character. I see a value in him, but I don't particularly like him. In this book alone, Kyle is as judgmental as ever. Aelin wasn't even in this book, yet he still managed to blame her for not being able to secure this alliance with the southern continent. When reading the novel, at times I felt like I really started to understand Kyle, and then he would say some shit like, "If Aelin kept herself in check, it would make my task much easier." We are on a book 6, and Kyle still considered the idea that Aelin might be actually responsible for the massive fires that are killing innocent people to be true. It was especially difficult to read about this judgmental attitude after reading The Empire of Storms, when you know just how much Aelin sacrificed in this war and how much more she is willing to sacrifice. And that's one of the reasons why I knew that I would love Yrene as soon as she was introduced in this book. Yrene, just like Aelin, doesn't take shit from anyone. Besides that, Yrene has actually suffered greatly from the Old King's regime, so consequently, just by being herself, she was a great reminder to Kyle that he was a big part in said regime. Yrene being the one to heal him also forced Kyle to admit that not doing anything in the face of evil still makes you an accomplice. In addition to being judgmental, Kyle is still very bad at dealing with his emotions. In this book alone, he lashed out on others, not once and not twice. Now that we got to spend so much time in his head, it became very obvious just how much he actually hates himself. But this hatred and this self-pity for the longest time doesn't turn into anything productive. He's mad at himself, so he hurts people around him. And if you know me, you know that I have never been a fan of the let's forgive and forget that he's being an ass just because he himself is hurting trope. In the beginning of Tower of Dawn, Kyle pushes Nesryn aside and then guilts her for not keeping him in the loop about her comings and goings in regards to her family. He lashes on Yrene over and over again. At one point, he goes even as far as telling Yrene, one of the most powerful healers in the world, a woman who is the reason he's regaining the mobility of his legs, that she has done nothing worthy with her life. And just how annoying it was for me to read the same pattern of Kyle getting closer to Yrene, then realizing that he's being unfair to Nesryn by falling for Yrene, and then instead of having a proper conversation with Nesryn, he just kept on pushing Yrene away and being mean to her just to feel better about the guilt he felt towards Nesryn. Even after Kyle and Yrene have sex for the first time, Kyle doesn't feel comfortable letting Yrene to stay in his rooms because Nesryn might come back and witness them, which is okay. Fair enough. He doesn't want to make it awkward for Nesryn, but he doesn't communicate his reasoning to Yrene. He just closes up and basically kicks her out. I had a revelation while reading Tower of Dawn though. Now I know better than ever that I just simply do not like Kyle as a character, and I doubt that I will ever will. However, I like him enough because of the dynamics he has with other people. I like him well enough in this book because I like the man he became when being with Yrene. I liked him in the first books of the series because of his friendship with Celaena, and I like him because of his unyielding loyalty to Dorian. But if you strip him down of all these other people, that helps to bring his best character qualities into the light, I just cannot learn to like him as an individual. Now, before we wrap this up, let's talk a little bit about the plot and revelations in the Tower of Dawn. First of all, I have to say that I just love the idea of Maeve being Valg. I honestly didn't see it coming, and combining Maeve and Eowyn as one thread was wonderful in my eyes. I just loved her backstory, and I love that she is the reason that brought the Vault Kings here in the first place. In the previous books, I tend to always overlook Maeve as a threat. I mean, yeah, she's powerful, but she is not anywhere near as threatening as Eowyn. And oh boy, how wrong I was. This book showcased Maeve's powers perfectly. We don't even get to actually see her at the Tower of Dawn, but just the fact that she managed to implant herself into the minds of the most powerful Fae of her times and convince them that she has always been the part of their court speaks volumes about the magical force that she possesses. In the end of the Empire of Storms, I was devastated by the fact that Ayelin was abducted by Maeve, but now I'm also terrified. As for the rest of the plot points, I did enjoy the subplot of Valk terrorizing the royal family and the healers. I honestly did not expect Duva to be possessed by the Valk. I was suspicious of Hafiza and Kashin and Hassad, but not Duva. Though I think that at the end of the day, this was a great choice, not only because her being possessed is a great plot twist, but also because her being a Valg and carrying a human baby is a great callback to Dorian being born out of Valg-human relations as well. Us knowing that Duva's baby is human gives us hope that Dorian is fully human too. Now that being said, I feel like I wouldn't have minded if the author would have chosen to kill Kael in this book. And that's not because I don't particularly like him as a character, but because the setting was perfect for it. We had a whole book about him. We saw him find his peace. We got him truly ready to sacrifice himself instead of running away, a thing that he did constantly and hated himself for. This would have been such a perfectly executed death of a character. But the bond plot between Yrene and Kael was cool too, I guess. Anyhow, at the end of the day, by the end of Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn, all of the main players on the chessboard are put in their positions. We know the truth when it comes to our enemies and what it takes to beat them. Or at least I hope that we know the majority of the truth. The only thing left is the saving of the world. Just like the last one, this book ended with a little bit of hope. We have Nesrin and Sartaq together and happy. We have Kael married to Yrene and bringing significant forces to fight. And when everything feels alright, we get the very last chapter of the book as a nasty reminder of what is happening with Ayelin. And all I have to say is that I feel so lucky to have picked up Throne of Glass series after they have been fully released, because if I would have had to wait a year or more to read the last installment of the series, I would be going crazy. But that's just my opinion. What about yours?